Hello, everyone. You're listening to the Year of Underrated Stephen King podcast. I am your host, Kim C. I am a creative writing instructor specializing in all levels of fiction workshop, and this is my one-woman Stephen King podcast where we go for it with all the gusto we can muster and dig our shovels in deep under the hard-packed soil of Stephen King's writing. It is so great to be with you all. I hope you are all well and enjoying summer 2026. Please forgive the long delay. I do declare this may be the longest delay in the history of the podcast. But if you don't know by now, Kim C may be late, but she's very much worth the wait. And the same can be applied for today's wonderful guest. Buddies, horror author John Langan is back on the Year of Underrated Stephen King podcast. Oh, happy day. I can't believe it. We are the luckiest of ducks, and this episode marks Langan's third appearance on our little show, which I think fully solidifies that Langan likes us. He's just so nice to us. If you haven't yet heard Mr. Langan's episodes, please jump back to episode 130, which is John's constant reader interview, as well as episode 140, where Mr. Langan joins me for our first ever Stephen King short story hour, where we explore Flannery O'Connor and King's homage to O'Connor with the short story On Slide in Road. I recommend you digest those aforementioned episodes before hanging out with us here, so you can pregame with all the Langan magic, but it's up to you. It's summer 26, we're all feeling a bit whimsical and free, so you do you. Do whatever you want, I shan't mind in the slightest. As you all know, June 2026 was reported to be a Kim C solo investigation of 1981's Cujo, because my goodness gracious everyone, why didn't anyone tell me Cujo was a brilliant masterpiece? Guys, I feel y'all held out on me. No one said anything, or, to be fair, you most likely did, and I may not have, to my everlasting shame, heeded your advice and bumped Cujo to the top of my TBR pile because I was under the terrible assumption that Cujo was about a rabid dog, and there couldn't be anything really substantial in the story, right? Early King is playing with monsters. Surely it's not going to be a layered read, right? Perhaps it would be like an early blueprint of the Sundog novella from the 1990 novella collection 4 Past Midnight. Cujo was the reputed cocaine book. Therefore, there's just no way. It's a little masterwork. Can't be. No way. No how. That's what I thought, everyone. Add all that up, and Cujo was not on the radar until this year's Stephen King Book Club theme of Castle Rock allowed for Cujo to finally get grabbed off the bookshelf. Dear listeners, I am simply in a state of shock over how wonderfully rich the novel Cujo was. I simply cannot believe what I have read. I cannot conceive the sophistication, the brilliance, the subtle strokes of larger themes at the center of a monster tale with so much symbolism, my head is spinning over here. I can't begin to understand how incredible it all is. And this June, I was all set to dive in and tell you about my newfound love for the masterwork that is Cujo until I got a precious message from Mr. John Langan, whose schedule was suddenly wide open to chatting with me. And dear ones, I could not pass up the opportunity to chat Cujo with a literal champion horror author. Ergo, the stars aligned, and this past weekend, right before celebrating America's 250th birthday, John Langan and I had the most decadent conversation about the novel Cujo. The two of us rummage among the ins, outs, ups, downs, and dare I say innards found within this underrated early 80s King novel that truly deserves more flowers than pop culture has doled out over the years. Thankfully, I think King agrees and recognized this little story did in fact need some more roses, and in 2024 he provided a gorgeous coda to Cujo in the form of the short story Rattlesnakes, found in the short story collection You Like It Darker. Devoted listeners, this is an episode that requests you have read the novel Cujo and hopefully the short story Rattlesnakes, And for extra credit, it is highly recommended that one has completed reading The Dead Zone. That novel is also a big bonus essential, because if you didn't know, King carries content from The Dead Zone into the novel of Cujo in a very cool way. Boys and girls, do I have a treat for y'all today? Let's do it. Without any more of my yammering, please enjoy my time with horror author John Langan as we discuss in depth and at length the overlooked Stephen King masterwork that is 1981's Cujo. Hello, everyone, and welcome back, Mr. John Langan, to the year of underrated Stephen King. It's the best day. It's summer. I've got Langan as my guest. There's nothing wrong in the world. How are you, John?
I am very well, thank you, Kim. I'm so delighted to be here and so delighted to have a chance to talk with you about Cujo.
I'm so excited. I'm so excited to dive in. Mr. Langan has been a guest on the show a few times. His episodes are the best ever. So I'm so excited to chat with Mr. Langan again on a really awesome classic King title. But before we head in that direction, I got to get some updates on the life of John Langan. John, tell me what you've been up to. There's been some cool French stuff happening. I need all the deets. What's going on in Langan's world?
Yeah, it's been a kind of a remarkable time, to be honest. A few weeks ago, I was in Pittsburgh for the Bram Stoker convention, StokerCon, where my most recent collection, Lost in the Dark and Other Excursions, won the Stoker Award, and it's for the collection category, which was just kind of mind-boggling because it was of a lot of the categories, maybe all the categories were very, very strong this year, and I thought collection was particularly strong, and I really felt it honestly was just an honor to be remembered and included with all these other brilliant writers, Clay McLeod Chapman and Haley Piper and Sarah Tantlinger and the mighty Gemma Files. And I honestly felt, anyone can win and it'll be fine. And then when they called my name, and to make matters worse, the collection category was like at the end of the ceremony, so you're sort of like waiting and waiting and waiting, and you're like, all right, enough with your whatever speech, your mom knows you love her. Let's get to my category. And I was just just really astonished to go through that. Anytime I've won something before, I haven't been there. I haven't been in the room when it was happening. And quite often, it's an email from somebody who says, hey, congratulations, you won our award. So to actually be there in the room was just very surreal, very dreamlike. And I kept they give you your award, and then they give you this gold box to carry it around in. And I kept thinking I would open the box and it would just be empty, it would or it would have, I don't know, a tongue in it or something like that, And so that was that was really, really remarkable. Especially because, to be honest, after the collection before this, which is called Corpse Mouth and Other Autobiographies, I really thought, I'm kind of done with collections for a while. I thought, I had in mind this kind of arc of collections, starting with my second collection, really through the fifth, and I thought, okay, I'm done for now. I obviously intended to do collections in the future, but not at the moment. And then a number of people said to me, okay, when's the next book? When's the next collection coming out? And so I reached out to Ross, my publisher, and I was like, well, Ross, what do you think? And he was like, sure. So yeah, it kind of feels particularly, I don't know what the right word is, not fortuitous exactly, but given that I wasn't planning a collection at all, the success with which this book has met has just been really, really incredible. So that's the big thing, I guess. That would be the biggest news. My French publisher did bring out a French edition of my first novel, House of Windows. They had brought out The Fisherman last year, and they brought out House of Windows this year. And there are these lovely, shiny, kind of 70s, 80s style editions of the books with the sprayed red edges, and the covers are, not only are they shiny, but they're all bumpy. They're all, embossed and such. And yeah, it's quite a delight to see that book in that form, because it's a long book. My first novel, it's about 130,000 words. And when it was published by Nightshade Press, they were trying to save on paper and if not ink. So they compressed it. It's the same length, but it's a skinny little book. And I always, you sort of look at the book and you think, this doesn't feel like the book I wrote. Whereas the French edition is this fat little paperback. And I'm like, yes, that's the book I wrote. So that was quite the thrill. And it House of Windows will probably never be quite as popular as The Fisherman, because it's a sort of a deliberately difficult book. I've often said that it's a book that I should have written like it should have been like book number 5 or 6, when people really start to trust you as a writer, and you can do things like have a really unsympathetic narrator, engaging, I hope, but unsympathetic. And your reader will go with you. But for a first novel, it was probably not the smartest move. So, but nonetheless, it's lovely to be out in France. And I was in France for a convention called Quai de Polar. I was there last year for the same convention. It's in the French city of Lyon, and it's just marvelous. To be a writer in France, you actually feel like a real writer. That they're just lovely. So yeah, there was that, and then I had a story published online at Reactor, what used to be Tor.com, called This Fleshy Side of the Bone. And this is my dog story, although it's very different from Cujo. But it was based on an event that happened when the first dog we ever got, this great big Labradoodle named Piper, died. And my younger son was at college, and at one point, my wife discovered an empty bottle of whiskey in his room, and she was like, "What's up with this?" And he was like, "Well," he said, "when Piper died, my friends and I got this, and we drank to Piper, and then we all signed the bottle afterwards." And which got me right in the feels, as they say. And it sort of prompted this story, which he has not read yet, and he doesn't know that this is in the story. So at some point, he'll be like, "Dad." But yeah, that's and I'm trying to finish writing a Conan the Barbarian tie-in novel, which I hope to have done by the end of the summer. And then I'm working on my next I don't know, original novel, I guess, called The Cleaving Stone, which I'm hoping to have done by the end of the year. And there's other stories and stuff, but you get the idea. It's a busy time. I can't complain.
Oh my goodness, Mr. Langan, what a season. This is awesome. I'm so glad to hear. It's just
Thank you.
bubbling in all the good places. That's awesome.
Yeah, like a cauldron, it's people are stirring in, add some French.
Right? Oil and boil. Yeah, what is it? The Shakespeare, the double
Boil,
There you go. Double
double.
toil and trouble.
There you go. Yeah. I always get that wrong, and that may explain why my spells don't turn out so well. But
oh my goodness. The macabre is always surrounding Langan, no matter how much he tries to run.
exactly. It's just here. It's just part of my life,
I love it. Congratulations on the Stoker Award. So thrilled for
Thank
you. That's
Thank you.
awesome. So this is such a treat to chat Cujo with Mr. Langan. And I want to hear from John about the first time you encountered Cujo in your readership. This is a 1981 King title. This is a Castle Rock story. And I think pop culture has really sort of ran away with this one. But tell me about your personal history with Cujo, Mr. Langan.
Well, do you know, oddly enough, Cujo was actually the first Stephen King book that I read. I read it the summer after I finished 8th grade, before I went into high school. And when I was in my elementary school, there was a girl there who was a huge Stephen King fan. She always had a Stephen King book with her, and she just read all the time. I was a little intimidated by Stephen King because I'm basically a wimp. And I was like, oh, I don't know. I remember the cover for Firestarter with, the fire and the eyes. But the summer after we graduated 8th grade, I was in the local library and I thought, yeah, maybe I'll give Stephen King a try. And so there was Cujo in hardcover, so I picked it up. And I can remember my dad looking rather dubiously at me, but he let me check it out. And honestly, I didn't like it. I suppose had to do in part with me being 14 at that point, and this being a novel about a kind of early midlife crisis.
Yeah.
And there wasn't the kind of supernatural in it that I recognized. There may be, but not such that I recognized. And so, I finished the book and I was like, oh, well, okay, so much for Stephen King. Now, a few months later, whatever it was, probably like 3 or 4 months later, Christine came out in paperback. And for whatever reason, I thought, oh, I'm going to give this a try. And that blew me away. That was my sort of gateway drug to Stephen King in particular and to horror in general. So a few years later, when I was sort of reading all the Stephen King I could get my hands on, I went back to Cujo. And this time, my hands were just nailed to the pages. I think it helped that I had become a constant reader. I sort of had a better appreciation of who King was as a writer. I think it also helped that I had read The Dead Zone, which I think is very useful thematically for Cujo.
Yeah.
And now I really admire the book because it is so ruthless. And I know that King has said that he kind of regrets the ending of the book. And so when it came to the film adaptation and they changed the ending for a more hopeful ending, he was fine with that. But it's interesting, he didn't change the book. He left the book as is. And of course, most recently with You Like It Darker, right? He has Rattlesnakes, this story which is a kind of a coda to Cujo and to a certain extent to Doomakey as well. And so that was interesting to me. I love the thought of King at different points in his writing career, thinking, I've still got a little bit more to say about this character or that character. Let me tell you about them. It reminds me of writers who've gone before him, like Faulkner or Balzac, where you really get the sense that there are all these characters just living in the writer's head. And at any given moment, one of them will step forward and say, hey, you know what? I have maybe talk about me. It's funny, my friend Laird Barron is very much like that. Every now and again, we'll talk and he'll say, do you remember this, minor character from this story that was published 15 years ago? And I'll say, yes, of course I do. And he'll say, well, I've just realized, and he's off on a new story about that character. And I think that, one of the things I love about Cujo is that for me, it's maybe more than The Dead Zone even. It's for me, it's that book where I really feel King like finding his place in the sense of Castle Rock, in the sense of that part of Maine. I mean, Carrie and Salem's Lot, yes, they're both Maine novels, but they don't. They're just Salem's Lot, Jerusalem's Lot is a town in Maine. It's not any town, but it could be, Whereas Castle Rock is a very specific place where very specific things are going to happen, and I appreciated Cujo a lot more having read The Dead Zone, which I don't think is absolutely necessary, but I would strongly recommend it.
Oh my gosh, I agree, because there's a Chief Bannerman connection. We learn about Chief Bannerman in The Dead Zone, and then he meets his fate in Cujo. But, I love your perspective, Mr. Langan. I love that about King sort of rooting himself in writing a Maine town story.
Yeah.
I finished Cujo for the very first time a month ago.
Oh, okay.
I am very fresh, and I am so in shock, actually, of how wonderful it was and how rich and deep and awesome it was, because I put it on the back burner of my Stephen King reading year after year after year under the false assumption from the film and pop culture that it's just about a rabid dog.
Yeah.
A rabid dog, and this is just a popcorn book with not a lot of depth, and this is just King having fun with some low-hanging fruit with this frightening animal.
Yeah.
What a fool I was, Mr. Langan, to reduce it to that. Because when I got in there, everyone had said, oh, that's the cocaine book. King doesn't remember writing it. And it's like, well, I have not partaken in the yayo before, but if it is as efficient as this, give me some. Oh my God.
I think, yeah, I've heard I thought it was Coors, but it's the same difference, that he was on some type of substance. He goes in and he just pours this comes out of him,
Absolutely.
and he's it's I feel like if a writer tells you something, on the one hand, I feel like you have to take them at their word.
Right.
Sometimes I wonder, though, I think you really don't remember any of it. You don't really, because there's some things in here that there are tropes that he revisits and engages with. I think there's a kind of a concern with evil, with where does the sort of nature of evil, where does evil come from? There's there's this incredibly tense and frightening extended sequence of the mother and son trapped in the car with this massive, I mean, Saint Bernards are gigantic,
Huge.
and it's very Stephen King to make it a Saint Bernard and not like a Doberman or something, right? Or a
Right.
Rottweiler, right? It's not like you're like, oh, a rabid Rottweiler. Well, that's frightening, but on some level you're like, that's not a surprise. But Saint Bernards, they have the little casks of alcohol under their chin. Everybody loves them,
Yeah.
But for that thing or for that kind of dog to turn on you is really, really frightening, and yet it's also, I feel like in the figure of Cujo and Cujo becoming rabid, I think that one of the things that King is playing with is this notion that he raises, this idea that he raises in Danse Macabre, the difference between inside evil and outside evil. And that outside evil is this thing that just takes you over, that you can only kind of fight against it. And maybe you can't even fight against it. When Dracula shows up, like if you're outside and Dracula gets you, there may not be much that you can do because he's so overpowering. And I feel in a way, this is almost like a naturalistic version of that with Cujo. He's bitten by a bat, right? He becomes this monster, and yet he doesn't, he only wants to be a good boy. That's his, his in a way, Cujo's heart remains pure.
Yeah.
Even if the rest of him is overtaken by this horrible infection.
I love that. I love that so much. I think what was fascinating for me looking at Cujo, because that's how King starts the novel off, we are in the perspective of the dog, which is very cool. Cujo has his own point of view, and he is this sweet creature. He is this wholesome character presence, this narrative voice. And then he gets infected by this bite, this chaos, this random event that happens to him. And he gets taken over, and then he becomes, I think King really takes away the narrative voice from Cujo, and Cujo's almost a force of nature in the second half of the novel. He's this killing menace, and he is killing people, and he doesn't want to, but it's overtaken him at this point. So that's at the heart of it. We have this horror creature, this very tragic character in Cujo. And then on the outside of Cujo, we have two families.
Yes.
The Cambers and the Trentons. And oh my gosh, Mr. Langan, what do you think about one family who's somewhat on the fortunate side monetarily? They seem to be doing well. We've got the biblical illusion of the Holy Family. Each one has mother, father, son.
Yep.
The Trentons and then the Cambers, who are the have-nots. The Cambers are definitely blue collar, probably not as economically advantaged as the Trentons. And so that's what blew me away is suddenly I'm like, okay, we've got a wild dog. Got it. We've got this poor dog who's killing people. But then we've got these two families. How do we unpack this, Mr. Langan?
Oh, I think it's to my mind, it's so well done. It's so interesting in that it's also a novel about both kind of middle class life and, I don't know what you would say, not quite poor, but maybe lower class, economically speaking, life during this time period. And King can write working people in various fields quite well. I mean, I know a lot of times we talk about, his characters are all writers, and there are a lot of writers, fair enough. But with the Trents, you've got this guy who's working in advertising, and this public relations nightmare has happened, which is both. It's kind of funny, and that's the thing. He imagines he invents this little bit where George Carlin is commenting on what's happened, and it's. I still like I still remember that. You know what I mean? Like that still makes me laugh just to think of it. So you've got that he's facing this kind of professional crisis, which he is able to kind of navigate in this kind of act of like an imaginative leap on his part. But at the same time, his marriage is on very shaky ground because he finds out his wife has been having an affair. And although she has broken off the affair, the guy she's been having the affair with lets him know, writes to, what one last act of menace, I suppose, or of spite. He lets the husband know, oh yeah, by the way, your wife and I. So you've got that going on, and they're trying to figure that out, and they're trying to talk through it. But also it could be the end of their relationship. And then with the Cambers. Sorry. Oh my God, that was bad. Anyway, with the Cambers, you've got a situation that it's weird that like their child is in a kind of jeopardy from the dad.
Yeah.
But it's not all the way there. It's not like it feels in some ways like King is saying, remember The Shining? But there's more to it, or not more to it, but it's just he handles it in a different way. Where the conflict there, right, is this mother realizing that her son really needs to get away from his father if he's going to have the life that she sees him capable of having, and the father is at first, the air of violence always hangs over that relationship, but I think that ultimately. The father shows himself mature enough, to say, okay, all right, we can make a deal. So their relationship, that there's they uncouple in the phrase of the day.
Yeah.
But not necessarily in a bad way. Whereas with the trends, that there's much more this question of how do you get through something like this? How do you get through this breakdown of profound breakdown of trust? How do you try to repair that? And it's interesting, like at this time in his life, I feel like a number of King's books have these kinds of setups, father, mother, small family, maybe one or two kids. Pet Cemetery is the other one that I really think of. But The Shining, looking backwards as well. And as he's gotten older, I think King has become more interested in older characters as well. But there's a point where that kind of nuclear family unit just keeps showing up and keeps being put under pressure not in every novel, but certainly in enough of his novels.
100% agree. And I think that's what's really fascinating about Cujo is pop culture really wants us to focus on the dog. But then when you actually start reading the novel, oh my goodness, Mr. Langan, we actually have a real villain, and it's not Cujo, it's Steve Kemp. It's the guy who Donna was having an affair with. He's, I believe, a very frightening blueprint for future King villains that are very sinister, very heinous, relentless. I was thinking about Norman Daniels and Rose Madder, who's a corrupt cop. Who's very abusive. And so Steve Kemp, the ladies in my Stephen King book club, we had a lot to say on Steve Kemp because what a frightening and timely representation we have of somebody who is really in a sense of entitlement, walking around the earth. And so it's not Cujo who's our villain, but Steve Kemp. What do you think about this guy who just went off the deep end because he was rebuffed?
Yeah, it's I think that's kind of what makes the book so interesting to me is because when we look at the Crenshaws,
Cambers.
Oh my God. It's going to become this joke.
Oh my gosh, they'll be Crenshaws for today.
Okay, well, anyway, but the Cambers, but like when we look at the Cambers, I think our reader response reaction is to think, oh, there's the villain right there. That's the
Right.
bad guy.
Right.
And it's not.
No.
It's not. It's this other guy, this kind of chaos agent, and we're really hoping that Cujo will just chomp him, but he just skates, just off he
Yeah.
goes. I don't. It's funny. I don't know if King ever writes about him again. I don't think so. But it's he does these bad things in the novel. He has a very fragile, like toxically masculine ego.
Yeah.
And when he's rebuffed, when it's like, okay, this is over, we're done, I'm not doing this anymore, he has to get revenge to prove that he still has the power. And that, I suppose if we're thinking about inside evil and outside evil, I mean, there's inside evil,
Yeah.
right?
There you go.
If outside evil is just, it's, hey, you get bit by a rabid bat, what can you do?
Right.
You're this is, I'm pretty sure, and I figured the novel must have been written about like 1980, 79, 80. I don't know if they had the rabies vaccine at that point. I mean, all my animals get it now, but I don't know if they would have at that time. So I think poor Cujo is just, he's doomed, and
Yeah.
I don't know to what extent, I don't know to what extent the Cambers would have gotten him as, they probably would have gotten him his rabies vaccine. I don't think they're that, or the dad is that irresponsible,
Right.
but because rabies is a big deal. So I think that you have that, but then you've got Steve Kemp, whom I always thought the description of Steve Kemp, he looks a little bit like Stephen King at that time period, the way he described his beard. And I've always thought, I've always wondered, did King, is that him putting his worst self onto the
Yeah.
page, who knows? But yeah, he's in the same way. How would I put this? It seems to me that there is a sort of a parallel or a reversal in that, the beginning of the novel gives you rabies coming into the world, this malign thing coming into the world and affecting Cujo, and then with what happens with Steve, he's going out into the world, having done what he did. He's on his way out to do something terrible, or who knows what else. Hopefully he meets a just fate. And I think that for me, it this is where as well the connection to the Dead Zone comes in,
Yeah.
with Sheriff Bannerman, who has seen, in the Dead Zone, has seen one of his deputies, one of his trusted deputies, turn out to be a horrible serial killer.
Yeah.
And the town is haunted by that, is haunted by when Bannerman is dying under Cujo's attack. He thinks, is that you, Frank? Is that
Yeah.
like, and we can say to ourselves, well, he's dying, it is, but I feel that there's more to that. I feel that there's some sense in which he's become the boogeyman for Castle Rock, and it's easy enough to believe, I guess, for Bannerman in that moment of extremity that he is in the dog. He's this, and I suppose, I mean, the only real, well, is that true? The only real clue in the Dead Zone you have that he's the serial killer is that he still lives with his mom, and she's kind of like this horrible figure. I feel like in Stephen King books, if you still live with your mom, that's never a good sign.
Absolutely.
Um, but he is this thing, like this cancer at the heart of the town, this sort of secret affliction that they don't know about, but that is killing parts of them. And I think that whole inside outside thing, I think, whoa, where does he fit? Like he's probably, it probably is an internal thing. On the other hand, when you see the horrible sort of family situation he has, you think, you know, are serial killers born, or are they made?
Yeah.
And I think that's what I really do enjoy about this sort of sequence of books that King sets in Maine. I think Pet Sematary fits in here as well. There's this kind of um, restless and relentless, I think, in a way, interrogation of these questions of good and evil, or the origins of evil, the way that evil can linger in a place too. I
Yeah.
think that even if, obviously Cujo's rabid, right? But he has now become like what's happened to Cujo now, right? We all joke, Cujo, every time you see like a little dog that's barking at you, you're like, down, Cujo, because it's funny, right? Um, but it these things that happen, they become, so like Cujo becomes a monster for us. He becomes this kind of byword in the same way that Frank, God, what is his name from the Dead Zone?
Dodd.
Dodd, Frank Dodd, yeah, Dodd like death, right? Like German, like the Dodd. But he's Frank has become the boogeyman now. He's become the sort of avatar of evil. Even if his spirit or whatever has gone far away, his identity or something like that lives on in the town's imagination, as Cujo's will as well. I'm sorry, that was a lot of talking.
No, I loved it. Oh my God, Mr. Langan. I'm just like digesting all of your beautiful thoughts because I'm so glad you brought up this very, very huge yet subtle part of the book in which King is bridging together the Dead Zone novel with Cujo. And we are echoing what happened in Johnny Smith's story with Frank Dodd, this serial killer. He killed 6 women, mostly Castle Rock. They called him the Castle Rock Strangler. And so it's echoing in Cujo. And so Cujo, even though we know Cujo's a good boy that's been overtaken by this virus, because as you said, the spirit, the memory, the placeholder that Dodd had in this small town, it's echoing throughout the text. And I think King is like trying to say, is there the spirit of Dodd in this dog? Is the dog possessed with the
Yeah,
evil because he is so relentless? Cujo's bloodlust toward the end of the novel, he just is relentlessly attacking. He won't
yeah.
stop. He's just on a killing spree. And so it's subtle, but do you think that King is trying to introduce that there is a bona fide possession here? Or is it just sort of, like you said, a little bit more sophisticated than that? And it's mostly the town haunted by
Yeah.
their own reality.
I think he's definitely leaving open that possibility. I think to myself, of course, in a sense, Cujo is possessed because the rabies is in the driver's seat. And of course that also makes me think about, all the theories that people have that are notions of the vampire and the werewolf may in some way be rooted in rabies and in seeing somebody who is rabid, who is sensitive to sunlight, who can't stand water, who's just violent and deranged. And so it also feels in a way like King going back to, before the beginning, as it were, with rabies. I mean, I think that King is also, as a writer, really interested in, I guess, what I would call the animal, or even the animal, like the animal sublime. Like he really is fascinated with this idea that people are animals, or that they can become animals, like Steve Kemp. That we all have
Yeah.
that animal side within us, and I think it originates, I feel like, in almost in like American naturalism, and in people like Dreiser and Frank Norris and that. And I think that he is so often in his novels, when people become when they become bad, when they become evil, they become more animalistic, and the human emotions, like love, they lose those. I think particularly about The Shining here, when Jack is possessed and he's just, running around with the axe, and the great moment in that novel is his wresting control of himself back enough to say to his son, I love you, run,
Right.
but that's it. After that, he becomes like this mad beast. And I think that for King, so often in his novels, especially the earlier novels, I think it's true in the later novels, but I have to think about that a little bit more. But the danger is of losing your humanity and slipping into this kind of animal state. And that animal state is primal and it's violent and it's not very nice. And yeah, it happens. I mean, it happens to Jack, and I mean, honestly, it happens in a way, at the end of of Cujo, right? It happens to the mom, who has to be treated for rabies herself, although she survives and goes on after the novel, along with the dad.
I'm so glad you brought up Donna. I want to talk about her for a quick second because I think I had a lot of women in my Stephen King book club, and a lot of us were a little bit torn as to how to feel about Donna. And I think in the early 80s, the adultery that Donna commits is kind of I think that the text really puts a spotlight on Vic. And so we feel really bad for Vic. We feel
Yeah,
Vic's doing all the right things, so to speak. He
right.
is the provider and he is seemingly a kind person. He's not an abusive husband. So why did she do this? And it's hard to swallow. It's hard to swallow and understand and empathize with Donna in this text. And so looking at literary analysis like we would in school, do you think that King was subconsciously classic text usually punish the
Yeah,
adulteress?
yeah.
This is Nathaniel Hawthorne style. This is Scarlet
Right,
Letter
right.
style, right? Where she's branded with the A, or she's got to sew it on all of her dresses. And so at the end of the novel, we have this very large chunk of body horror, of grief horror, of Donna becoming rabid and Donna being a final girl almost.
Yeah,
One
yeah.
could argue. I had a lot of people who were very upset with the violence against Cujo at the end because it's very graphic,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
violence. I think Donna is an amazingly complex character in this book. My goodness. And so, how do you feel like old school readers of Donna and then maybe gendered reading of Donna? And yeah, what are your thoughts on Donna, Mr. Langan?
Oh, I love Donna. King himself has said that what he doesn't like about the ending of the novel as it is that it makes it look like he was punishing Donna, and that was not what he wanted to do.
Gotcha.
And you could make the argument, well, regardless of what you wanted to do, here's how it reads. But I think that Donna, how would I put this? Like, she has an affair.
Yeah.
Not the best thing to do if you're in a marriage, or unless you're in an open marriage or polycule or whatever, but Stephen King's new novel, Polycule. But she feels herself getting older. She feels herself getting older, and she decides to have an affair, and it's half a dozen times, and it's a mistake, and she owns it. And I think that paradoxically, I think that makes her a more interesting character to me than if Vic had been like abusive or neglectful or
Right.
whatever, and you were like, oh, the poor woman, of course she had to do this. So that sex in that way becomes not something you're pursuing for your own pleasure, but it's an escape of some kind. Whereas here she's just like, she's dealing with her own feelings basically, and this is the choice that she makes. I like the idea of her in a lot of ways as a final girl. I had never thought about that before, because it's a brilliant way to think about that, because so often with final girls, I associate it with a lot of running,
Yeah.
that final girls are not in enclosed spaces. Maybe they are at a certain point, but basically they're running all over the place. And whereas she's, trapped in the car, right? With trying to, and I think in the end there, she is trying to keep her son alive. And I
Yeah.
think so and if she were a terrible mother, if she were a terrible person or whatever, she might have just been like, listen, kid, you know, you can't run as fast as I can, so I'll see you later. But it's, instead, instead she stays and she fights for him. The violence, I have always liked King's violence because it's violent.
Yeah.
I feel like you know in King, I think you do see in his horror fiction, you do see what I think of as the the what would you call it, like the entropy principle in horror fiction, or the Murphy's Law principle in horror fiction, that anything that can go wrong will go wrong in a horror narrative. So, you know, the bad guy, the monster, whatever is in front of you, you've got your gun with the silver bullets, and it jams or so, like that's always going to happen. And so I feel like when Bannerman approaches, when everybody who's killed by Cujo, really, it's almost like bad luck. But it's bad luck raised to this sort of cosmic principle, where the worst thing that can happen is going to happen. And so I think that is expressed in part in the violence that King visits on his characters, that they don't just get a little nip from the dog or whatever. He really tears, which is what dogs do. He tears them open, and is ferocious and unreasoning. For me, that raises the stakes and keeps the stakes believable. And I wonder, would we like the novel better, or how would we feel about the novel if Donna dies saving her son, but he lives, and would we then feel she redeemed herself from her adultery because she gave her life saving her son, which would play into other kinds of gender stereotypes that are, maybe not so cool. It's harder, obviously, to have to live
Yes.
after all of this, and it's kind of why I'm glad in Rattlesnakes, in the sequel novella, that we find out that, spoiler alert everybody, but we find out that after the events of the novel, she and Vic do split up, because how could they not? But it has more to do with the death of their child than it does anything else. But then later in life, they do come back together again and have a relationship that lasts until she dies of natural causes. And that was, I felt, King, in revisiting those characters, he was giving the characters, if not the situation in Cujo, but the characters, he was giving them a more graceful ending.
I agree. I wholeheartedly agree with that, because I think just the time of Cujo being written, I'm so glad you mentioned that it wasn't King's intention to punish Donna, and it does come across that way. It can be
Yeah.
interpreted that way. The adulteress is being punished by the rabid Cujo, who is now an agent of chaos by the time we get to the end of the novel. He's very much like Jaws. He's just hell-bent on destruction, and Donna and her sin have put them both in the path of the creature. Right. And I think it's so brilliant, because of any character sequels for King to have done with the Rattlesnakes novella, this was so amazing. And now, having read Cujo, having embraced this very complicated marital discord, and then to see that at the end of the novel, it was, wow, a bloody mess, a horrifying, traumatic conclusion. And then, like you said, then there's just life and time without their son. And what does the road look like for these two that have encountered such an unimaginable loss?
Yeah.
And I love that he pulls them apart and he brings them back together, and there's grace there, there's forgiveness, there's healing. And this is why it makes me love King even more. For anybody who marginalizes him as just a horror writer, to not understand the full scope of the human experience, and to give the reader like so much more. And of course, as you mentioned earlier, they're in old age. He's looking at elderly characters. He's looking at the passing of time and what time gives back to us in a graceful way sometimes, and what it still takes from us, such as long ghosts that haven't crossed over and they're still haunting the place. But I love your thoughts so much on the Donna and Vic story having this horrifying bookmark at the end of the novel, this very sad bookmark, and then King gives us this longer road that really does heal it like smooths over all of the jagged crags from the novel. It sort of like paves that over with cement, which is so nice. And I'm so grateful that we get to live in the timeline when this is real. It's just such a fulfilling reader experience. And I only just read Cujo. I can't imagine those like yourself who read it decades earlier and who had this story sort of in the back of one's mind, living your life decade after decade. And then you're like, wow, what a full circle.
Yeah, yeah. And I think what's, from a writer's perspective, reading Rattlesnakes now, King goes back and he says, "Oh, well, what happened to these characters? Oh, you know what? Actually, it kind of worked out for them. They had a graceful end to their time together." But he also is like, I gave Vic this kind of psychic vision in Cujo. He got what about that? What is there anything more with that? And then that leads to this whole other kind of story. And I mean, obviously you hear rattlesnakes, Cujo, you think, more like animal horror. And there's something of that. I can't deny, but it's also about, yeah, allowing your ghosts to be gone, or allowing your ghosts to go their own way. And yeah, that is pretty profound. It's a pretty profound coda to tack onto Cujo, because Cujo just ends with devastating loss and with this bittersweet, tragic, even, meditation on Cujo and Cujo's point of view. And Cujo just wanted to be a good boy. That was all he wanted, and that didn't exactly work out. And instead, with Rattlesnakes, we get, a more fulfilling ending, I guess, or something like that. Which also lets us know that it also gives us a little bit of information on Doomakey, that island has been wiped out. So, it's so there's but again, that's part of the thing we were talking about earlier with King, the way in which his universe feels like this place that he just lives in, and he just kind of has been walking around in for decades, and there are, you mentioned Rose Madder, and Rose Madder in some way seems to sit off a little bit on its own, but then there are also maybe connections to the Dark Tower in that book.
Oh yeah.
And so it's I think what we're getting from King, and what we have gotten from King these last several years, is this continued, expansion, and I was going to say solidification of this great fictional world, or worlds, that he's constructed. And yeah, it feels pretty amazing to see this, to have this body of work that you can now read, in the same way that you can go back and you can read all of Balzac or Zola stuff, and you can be like, oh wow, look at how they're doing this. You can see the same thing with King.
I love it. Wholeheartedly agree. I wanted to highlight really quick the death of Tad Trenton. So I know we touched on this a little bit, but one of the cool things that I keep coming back to when I think about Cujo, it's really sort of romance to me, body and soul, is the two families, our Cambers and the Trentons, and how they are mirroring each other, they are paralleling each other. And so the mom, the Camber mom, of course, I'm missing her name. Let me look at my notes really quick. I think her name is Charity. Charity Camber is the mom. Brett is the son. On the Trenton side, we've got Donna and Tad. And so Donna thinks she's trapped from her own emotions. As you mentioned, she's dealing with her own emotions, but Charity actually is trapped.
Oh, yeah.
Super economically trapped. And Joe is not the nicest guy. So she and Brett got to get out of Dodge. And they do. They take the train to go see her sister Holly in Connecticut, and they are getting out of town. And the reader knows she ain't coming back, but Joe doesn't know that. So we've got one mom making a big sacrifice, a dangerous decision to save her son. Donna, on the other side, who has a lot more economic advantages, is also making the same sacrifices for Tad. But Tad, this little 4-year-old precious angel, is sacrificed. He does not make it.
Yeah.
We've got our sweet, wholesome dog who just wanted to be a good boy, who becomes the agent of chaos. And then we have Tad, who is this collateral damage. And one son was saved, and then one son on the other side was not.
Was sacrificed. Yeah.
And so I'm looking at these parallels to these families, and I'm just wanting to know, what do you think King is doing and or saying with these two families? And And Tad's death, I mean, in 1981, this must have been like quite shocking.
Yeah.
I mean, everybody in the history of film and cinema, you save the cat, you save the animals, you
Right,
save
right,
the
right, right.
children.
Yeah.
This is what you do. You don't harm children and animals in your production.
Yeah.
And King goes for it. And Tad dies. And it's dark and it's such a big pit in the stomach of the reader. But I don't think any of us would change it, especially now. And is this grief horror? Was King is this a foray into grief horror that might not have been explored yet? You might have a better knowledge of the horror facets around this time, unknown.
Well, I think thinking back to the 70s and let's just say the horror of the late 60s, early 70s. I mean, you do have children in peril. Reagan and The Exorcist would be the
Right.
big example.
Yeah.
And you have children as the source of horror in Rosemary's Baby or what is it? Children of the Damned and Village of the Damned, I think. I can never remember which one comes first, but the little creepy English kids with the blonde hair and the glowing eyes.
That's a good one.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's I think I think King was thinking about that in the Institute, but that's another story. Um, but yeah, I think children in jeopardy though, or children dying, well, that's the difference, right? Children in jeopardy, number of books, right? Something Wicked This Way Comes as well. But children dying, like how different would The Exorcist have been if Reagan just dies,
Right,
if that's
right.
like it, and Harris is like, oh, but like,
Whoops.
what exactly? Whoops! Oh man, yeah. Oh dear, he's just like backing out of the room. But yeah, the and the Omen too, right? Like
Oh
there's
yeah.
another sinister child, and what's interesting. I mean, see where this goes. King has in Danse Macabre. King makes the argument that the success of a movie like The Exorcist, and I would argue The Omen too, has to do with a sort of sublimation of parental anxieties about their children's behavior during the late 60s, well, throughout the 60s, but especially the late 60s, early 70s, the free love and free drugs and burn your bra and tune in, turn on, and drop out. And I think that so that the children in those narratives are often these ambiguous kinds of figures, that Reagan is really a sweet girl, but she's possessed. Damien, on the other hand, well, it's not looking so good. He's got the 666 on his forehead. But even so, though, you have to ask yourself, but what if he's raised right? What if he gets um, and I think that the death of children is sometimes portrayed. I'm trying to think about maybe like The Changeling, that movie, where there may be a dead, and I may be confusing it with another movie, but there may be a dead child, but it's happened before the narrative. It's a haunting, right? In Peter Straub's first horror novel, Julia, you have the ghost of a little girl, and you have a mother who accidentally killed her daughter trying to give her a tracheotomy when she was choking. But that has happened before the narrative begins. I think that the child dying is something that I don't associate. There's probably some major example I'm forgetting, right? But I don't associate or think of much before Cujo and then Pet Sematary. I
Oh
feel
yeah.
like Cujo. It's interesting, like I don't remember which King wrote first, Cujo or Pet Sematary, because I know he wrote Pet Sematary kind of early and then put it away and was like, no, this is too much. So is Pet Sematary the dry run for Cujo or vice
Ooh.
versa?
Yeah.
Are they? I think they're both dealing with profound anxieties that he had as a dad.
Yeah.
He, I remember him saying, reading an interview with him about Pet Sematary, and he said, kids die, and I want to say that I think in that same interview, he said that his youngest son, Owen, that there was a brief period as when he was a baby where they thought he might be hydrocephalic, I think. And it turned out not to be the case. But, King has as a writer, right, always been in touch with his fears and his anxieties, and I think the anxieties that we all share. So I think I feel like with Cujo, the grief happens at the end, and it's just this like I don't see Cujo as grief horror so much as like tragedy or
Yeah,
calamity or something like that, you know? Whereas I think in Pet Cemetery, the death happens early enough that that's grief horror. That's
right.
really, what do you do? What are you going to do after this horrible thing has happened? And you have access to a certain burial ground. What might you do? You know, so just putting one and one together, it's out there. Dead body resurrecting burial ground,
Decisions.
This is right, right. What am I gonna do? You want to watch the game? Actually, I'm thinking about going and digging up my son.
I would like to play God this afternoon.
Exactly, exactly.
I love connecting the death of Tad to, I think that's so smart and so cool to connect it to a Pet Cemetery. And then also look at little Danny, even though he made it, according to some scholars, the original draft of The Shining, it was pretty dicey for Danny.
Oh, that's right. I've not finished that book. I think I know the one you mean about Stephen King's the manuscript studies of King. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, Carolyn Bix is doing God's work out there. But yeah, so I think this is a really astute observation in looking at King being very, very close to the fears in fatherhood and parental fears, and then channeling that into the stories. And the death of Tad, I just don't see any other way out of it. The capture and the imprisonment of Donna and Tad is a huge chunk of the book. It actually is really surprising, Mr. Langan. Like,
yeah,
when you're there, it's a good almost 150 pages,
yeah,
almost. Like,
yeah, yeah,
it is a long time of being trapped with Donna and Tad and seeing the hopelessness grow. It's a very, very powerful and elongated chunk of the novel where you're just in this hopelessness. And then
yeah,
for little Tad, after all that to not make it, I mean, this is some serious stuff. That's just like,
yeah.
wow. And I think it's amazing that we are able to talk about it with the same sort of shock and reverence, of course. I mean, all these years later, it's amazing. It's just very, very cool to see that there was really no other way. I think that if Donna would have not made, no, it had to be Tad. Like Tad, I think with what King was doing with these two
Yeah.
families, with Cujo being an agent of chaos, like this is where it was headed. This young boy was going to pay that price, and it's very, very sad. And yeah, I think this is definitely a seed for where King was going in future harder novels.
Yeah, I mean, I think simultaneously, I think about it, and I think about all the children who die in it, and
Yeah,
all the child death in it, and at the beginning, um, Bill's younger brother Georgie has been killed, and his parents and he himself are sitting with that grief for his parents, maybe for all of that time in the novel. For Bill, his grief becomes transmuted because he finds out someone's responsible, and then his grief can spur him to vengeance, to action. Whereas in well, I mean, same thing happens in Pet Cemetery. I mean, grief does spur you to action. But I think that the ending with Cujo too is also kind of fearless. I feel like, because it's, yeah, as you said, you don't kill the kid, you don't kill the kid, you don't kill the dog, and King's like, oh, just wait.
hold
And
my
I
beer.
right, exactly, hold my non-alcoholic beer. Um, and so I also kind of feel that it's King's way of pushing back against those kinds of genre conventions and saying nope, this is, I don't think he necessarily has John Updike in mind, but he's but he's thinking that in a quote unquote literary novel, a realist novel, if the kid died, no one would bat an eye. They would be like, well, that's what happens,
Right, right.
So here we're going to do the same thing here.
I love that so much. And I think it's just about writers writing what's true for them, regardless of genre, and not being afraid. If the story, if the truth of this character needs to come out that way, I love that. And I think, I mean, it makes so much sense why he went to Bachman and why Bachman was, the sort of cover where he could be as unfiltered as he wanted, because this is a hard job, especially when you're that successful, to make these cuts, to say these things, to have your characters say the things that his characters do.
Yeah.
It's ugly stuff. It's frightening stuff. And a lot of people have sort of held him to the fire because it doesn't age well, Mr. Langan, as we know. Like, a lot of these character behaviors are quite horrifying as the decades go on. It's not our favorite thing to discuss, but it was true. It was true for him. It was true for his authentic storytelling. It's ugly, but he is, I think, bringing the reader to that almost journalistic look at, this is the ugliness of the world we live in. This is human horror.
Yeah. And I think that looking at those parallel relationships that he features in the novel, I mean, I hate to say it, but people still commit adultery.
Yeah.
And people still make bad marriages. People still find themselves in these, sort of desperate situations. And there's at least a solution to one, which is money.
Yeah.
If you can get money, you can get out. And that strikes me as very, very naturalistic. The other, though, it's looking at yourself in the mirror and thinking, oh man, I'm getting old. What am I going to do? And don't get me wrong, I'm sympathetic. Every time I look at pictures of myself, I'm like, where did Santa Claus come from? Look at that guy's white beard. What is going on? So I understand but yeah, I think that the kind of emotional content and of the book and also the socioeconomic context of the book, I think remains maybe sadly relevant, if probably more so than I wish, actually not probably, definitely more so than I wish it were.
Absolutely. And I think the film augments this to a stronger degree. The Cambers are living in a ramshackle place in the country. They're out in the sticks, and he's got his little car business. They don't even have a good road sign.
Yeah.
And then, of course, the Trentons are there in their Mercedes, and they have a very beautiful home overlooking the ocean. And so the film really shows, I think, enhances what King was trying to say.
Yeah.
We have a very well-to-do family that should want for nothing, even though there are cracks under there. They don't have the most solid marital foundation. All that glitters is not gold, so to speak. But then the Cambers have not the rosiest situation either, but it's mostly economic.
Yeah.
And they're driven toward hardship, especially Joe Camber. There's a sense of hopelessness because you can't provide. So then you start drinking too much, and then that's bad. It's a domino effect on the son. And then the mom's like, I'm out of here. Like, I'm stuck. I am trapped. And I do love that King is doing some really awesome stuff with female characters, and it can be missed if we're not looking at it, if we're not looking closely enough. And that was one of the things I loved about Cujo, because I think pop culture mentioning the film and just the all-consuming presence of Cujo, I think the reader is constantly gravitating to when the dog's going to be on the page next.
Yeah.
And so it's so clever, because if you let the characters if you really have them in your spotlight, he's doing some very cool things with these women, and they have agency in surprising ways. Specifically, Charity Cambers, she's like, I am getting the hell out of here. I am leaving my husband. I'm taking my son. I am saving whatever little shekels I can to get on a train, and we're not coming back. And that's just a tiny little thin narrative amidst the bubbling cauldron of Cujo. And I just love that we've got some sophisticated stuff going on with these characters, Mr. Langan, and it could be missed because we're in the middle of like a Disneyland thrill ride, and then King's doing literary stuff on the chalkboard. So it's easy to miss.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think you're absolutely right. I think that because the novel is called Cujo, right? It's like Jaws. When is the shark going to show up? When is the dog going to turn rabbit, or like you start killing people? And obviously that's the hook, right? That,
Yeah.
this, but, but there is some weird way, because I was thinking, whenever you get a narrative like this, where it's not just, a rabid dog story, but there are all these other things going on. The rabid dog story has the potential, right, to take on all kinds of symbolic and metaphoric kinds of resonance, and it in some ways, Cujo seems like, even though, right, the Cambers have it, kind of difficult economically, and the Trentons have it difficult, relationship wise, like it's as if the world is this rabid dog, like
Ooh, I like that.
it doesn't matter who you are, it doesn't matter how much money you have or don't have, or whatever, the world is still coming for you either way, and it has sharp teeth, and it can infect you too. It can, the Steve Kemp is out there too,
Yeah.
just driving away. I have to admit, I do wonder what it occurred to me when you were talking about Joe Camber drinking a lot, and being, because of his lack of worldly success, and that, obviously King was not. I mean, he was very, very successful, and yet, as we know, an alcoholic, and as we said, he says he doesn't remember writing this novel. And I do wonder if any of his own anxieties were being transferred to that character, not to not to Vic, the successful guy that you might think, but to the guy who's like this kind of yokel, from Maine, who's just like, oh man, am I going to be able to keep it together? And I wonder if that, in any way, I mean, who knows, right? But I wonder if that's present there.
I love that. I think looking at substance, specifically King's addiction, because this would be probably his high using years if we're looking at the
Yeah,
calendar. According to the timeline, so to speak, he gets sober 88, 89. There's an intervention. So
yeah,
we've got 86 and 87. It is released, as well as Misery. I think Drawing of the Threes. It's just a juggernaut.
yeah. There's four that year. It's the Tommy Knockers, it's Misery, and there's one Eyes of the Dragon, maybe. I'm not sure. There's one more
Right.
that's released. Yeah, because it was like this big deal. Like, oh my God, he's going to release these four books.
Totally, totally. So we are like primo, primo plugged in with the
Yeah,
sauce.
yeah,
And I think that for artists, and this has been throughout the history of time, whether you're using hallucinogenic absinthe in Paris during the Belle Epoque, or if you are getting wasted with Hemingway, or
right.
however you want to, I think artists and substance and overindulgence, it's part of the creative process. And so with talent, you get to that frightening place where you feel you can't produce without it.
Yeah,
I am not who I am without my 5 o'clock cocktail. And then the 5 o'clock cocktail becomes 10 a.m. and 2 o'clock cocktails. And
yeah, yeah,
then
yeah,
there's a buttload of cigarettes in there. And then let's add some cocaine in there. And then it's a party. And then you're just sort of consumed, but still producing. And so then, like you said, when Cujo's most likely being composed, this is late. King is a successful writer,
yeah,
and he doesn't have to write to men's mags to get the rent paid and to get the light bill paid. And so now he's just an artist.
yeah.
And we've got this really awesome thrill ride of a novel. But do you think, like many compare the novel Misery, that Annie Wilkes is King's cocaine addiction? But do
Hmm.
you, do you think any of these characters, such as maybe Steve Kemp or maybe Cujo, even though Cujo seems kind of like a neutral,
Yeah,
is this maybe King saying like, substance abuse is real and addiction can sneak up and get you? And I don't admit I have a problem yet. I don't think he's there yet. But
yeah, yeah.
do you think we might have sprinklings of that, or is it too early?
I think he knew. I mean,
Yeah.
I think, he's I think it's in On Writing that he talks about, having been drinking since he was in high school at least.
Right.
And so I think he knew that it was an issue. I mean, he may have been in denial. He may have denied, the extent to which it was a problem. But I do think about, how do you write like The Shining? and not know.
Right.
On some art level, maybe it's not your conscious mind, but your artistic consciousness is like, no, 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 this is totally how it is, buddy. Just, So I do think that those kinds of compulsive behaviors show up again and again in King's fiction. And I think that rabies is it's one you can reach for quite easily. And it's the thing about rabies is that it's different enough from getting drunk
Right.
that or snorting coke or whatever, that you can just say, no, it's rabies, it's got nothing to do with my addictions.
Mm.
But it's definitely this portrait of this big lovable thing out of control and in fact becoming quite dangerous instead.
Very nice. Very nice. Yeah, the Saint Bernard, as you mentioned, is just a sweet, gentle
Yeah.
giant.
Yeah. You wanna, they have the cocktail, right? I mean, there's the interesting point. This is King would probably say that I'm just pulling this out of a certain orifice, but the Saint Bernard is the only dog that you associate with alcohol
Yes.
because of the little cask, right? It's the only dog you associate with alcohol. And what's the dog that's trying to kill everybody? It's the Saint Bernard.
Oh my God. I never paired
Yeah,
this
no, I never did until
together.
this moment. It just occurred to me,
I
and
love
it's
it.
it's
For those who live in the desert like myself, it's because Saint Bernards are mountain dogs
yep.
and it's for avalanches, right,
Yeah,
John?
people who were lost in the snowy Alps, the Saint Bernard, finds you, and it has this little cask full of like brandy or something like that to help to warm you up. And I don't think they travel on their own. Like I think there's a guide or whatever who's with them, but they're also very strong dogs, and
Yeah.
so if you need help getting back, they can help to pull you on a sled or something. It's no, they're great. They're great dogs, but yeah, no, it's interesting to think of Cujo as a kind of early confused, sort of representation of the addiction. And what does Cujo do? He traps your family. He
Yeah.
traps your family in this
Oh,
little space, right? And to devastating effect.
oh my gosh, so many layers. I love that. I love that so much. That's so good. Do you remember in the 90s when they had the Cujo rebrand with the Beethoven films?
Yes. I never thought about it that way, but yes, that we got to do something for St. Bernard's. Cujo's killing the market. Yeah.
Totally true. You could tell there was some breeders who needed a PR help.
Yeah. There was one called Turner and Hooch, but I don't think that was with Tom Hanks, but I don't think that was a St. Bernard.
He wasn't. Was he a pit? We might have to do some
No, he had like
IMDb.
really like big jowls because he like flops his head and like it's a mess.
I love that movie. I was a child of the 80s, early 90s, where kids saw all the adult films, whether we
Yep.
wanted to or not. Especially on the weekends when my aunts and uncles wanted to go to the movies, they took us with them. And I'm
Right.
6 and 7 watching Rated Terrible, but whatever.
Right.
I don't regret a thing. It's awesome.
Yeah.
But I saw the movie. I saw Turner and Hooch because I think my parents thought it was a kids movie, and I guess it was.
Kind of. There were all these weird movies at that time that like they were technically rated PG. So your parents were like, oh, okay, you can go see them. But then you got in there and you were like, wait, what? And
Yeah.
and you just kind of went with it because you were like, well, okay, but at the same time, in retrospect, you think, I'm not so sure I should have been watching that.
Very dark subject matter. There was a lot of crime and drugs.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
It was PG, so there we went.
Right. The Motion Picture Association has assured you that this is okay.
Oh my gosh, I wouldn't change a thing. But yes, in retrospect, we were exposed to far too much too soon.
Yeah.
But I love, oh man, I am so impressed by Cujo, Mr. Langan. And I think that there are a lot of King fans out there, a lot of constant readers who probably felt how I felt. Most constant readers do the smart thing and they'll read King chronologically, starting with
Yeah.
Carrie. But some
Yeah.
are punk rock like myself and you hopscotch around. And I just
Sure.
thought Cujo was going to be nothing of substance, when
Yeah.
in actuality, it is jam packed with symbolism and parallels, and it is just so cool. And Cujo is, yes, the frightening hook, as you mentioned. He's
Yeah.
the frame of the story. But at its heart, we've got two families. We've got this psychopathic, toxic, masculine, true human villain
Yeah.
who just wants power and who's just as relentless as what Cujo becomes. And
Yeah.
oh man, there's just so much to say with this one. Oh my gosh, Mr. Langan. But we could start to wind down a skosh. And do you have any final thoughts for the novel Cujo? Anything we didn't unearth? And or somebody who thought, like I did, that Cujo, there's not much happening. How would you encourage that they see the error of their ways?
Well, I'll start with the second question first, right? Which is I would say I would say, well, not every book works for everyone. That's
Right.
okay. I would suggest if you like King, read The Dead Zone and
Yeah.
then read Cujo. I think if Cujo didn't work for you on its own, and I do think it stands on its own, but I have to admit maybe I'm wrong. Maybe the exposure to The Dead Zone really helps. So that would be, and if you want, read Rattlesnakes after you read Cujo, but
Yeah.
that that's a sort of a coda. So I would suggest that. I would say it also depends what you're looking for in King. There are some people who are, diehard Dark Tower fans, and that's really the thing they're looking for, and
Right.
which is great. Cujo's very different from that in a lot of ways. In terms of like, I don't know, closing thoughts or whatever. I mean, it is a reminder, right? That there's just, there's so much to King's work that
Yeah.
he's just produced like a surfeit of really, really amazing work. And there are these kinds of, I don't know, patterns, I want to say, that you find in his work. I found myself thinking about The Girl Who Loved Tom Gordon, a
Yeah.
much later, much more slender book, but about a young woman who was being stalked or threatened or something by a voracious animal, and it's not Cujo at all, but it's as if it's like a refraction of Cujo, or as if Cujo's a refraction of it. Um, and I think that probably if we thought about it more, Misery we mentioned, right? The sort of the person trapped in one room while a malevolent force menaces them. That's something that, okay, we can see a connection to Cujo that way. So I think I think that Cujo really, it's and it's for a King novel, it's relatively short. It's relatively terse. I mean, and yet it manages to do all these amazing things. So yeah, I highly recommend it.
I do too. I think that this is really shot to the top of my list, and I was completely not expecting that. And I love your recommendation of sandwiching Dead Zone and Cujo together. I think that's so brilliant. And that's such a nourishing reader experience because we meet Johnny, who's a beautiful, tragic character in the King canon. Johnny is just so beloved. He's great. His
Yeah, yeah,
journey is just heartbreaking. And then there's the Frank dad, and we meet his terrible mother, and it's so freaky.
yeah,
And then King sort of pairs them together in an interesting way. It's very subtle. Chief Bannerman's in both of them. So we have a recurring character. But then he's, like you said, he's zooming out and he's looking at Castle Rock as a whole. And he's looking at the economics of these people. He's looking at the emotional problems of these families. So he's doing sort of like a more concentrated, distilled version of what he was doing in Salem's Lot, which is the big ensemble cast,
yeah,
lots of characters, little vignettes here and there. But now we've just got two families. And now we're zooming in really closely on every single person in each family.
yeah.
And it's just so good. It's so good what we've got and how everybody is in the circle with the larger circle with Cujo circling
Yeah, yeah,
and
yeah.
what Cujo represents and how at the same time we can't hate Cujo.
No, no, he's sick.
He's
He's infected, and that makes him like he's a danger, but we can't feel, or we shouldn't feel self-righteous. And really, that's a good lesson in general. Something may be a danger to you, but that doesn't mean that you have to feel self-righteous or should feel self-righteous about it. I'm so much better. I don't have rabies there, but for the grace of God, go any of us.
Right. I also really quick, I'm thinking about Frankenstein a little bit.
Yeah.
Frankenstein's creature, the creature. It's not Frankenstein. I've committed a huge faux pas, but the creature and how the reader, we love the creature. We hate Frankenstein. Frankenstein's garbage, but we love the creature. And I think that the reader is left with such sympathy for Cujo. My last question for you, Mr. Langan, is one of the things that was hard for me as a book club moderator is having not read Cujo, I underestimated the amount of animal violence, and I'm a huge animal lover, and animal violence is hard in any book. King, of course, will kill his darlings, especially the animals, and he takes the reader to those dark places. But Cujo, it is a violent against dogs book, and it's tough. And so I think that there are I had a couple people in book club that were so horrified by the graphic violence against Cujo the dog and other dogs that they put up a wall. And so as a horror writer, everybody's got their triggers. Everybody's got their, I do not pass go. I can't. For me, it's slashers. I have to tread carefully. Slashers, they freak me out. If it's comedic and light, I'll go for it. But like some of the darker ones, I know my limits. But I want people to read Cujo, but I also know the animal violence is a lot. And so is there anything as a horror writer and as somebody who knows this genre, is there any way that you can like help somebody walk the road with you to read this book? Or is it, like you said, one of those books that's just not for everyone?
Yeah, I mean, I think you can say from a kind of interpretive standpoint, Cujo, by the end of the novel, has become this infected beast.
Yeah.
He is. So what might be more difficult in that sense to read might be that transition rather, because I would argue that once we get to the end, as you said, it's like it is like a slasher movie or a monster movie. He's a naturalistic monster, but he is not, a rabid dog must be destroyed. I mean, must be killed. There's no, and ideally, that would be in To Kill a Mockingbird style, with Atticus and his single shot. But so that, in terms of like violence against animals, I would say, well, it's violence against a dangerous infected creature in this particular situation. I completely understand though. Some people are like, nope, I'm tapping out.
Right.
And it's not something I myself do, but I respect it. I respect that people have very, very strong feelings about, especially when it comes to animals. And I think I would just say, well, I respect and I honor that. So it's, no harm, no foul. If you can't do it, you can't do it.
It's a good reminder because I think as an academic professional, like I'm just a soldier and I'm going to go. Yeah. I'm going to go no matter what because I have to. And especially as the moderator, I got to lead people into the heart of darkness.
Yeah.
We are going, Mr. Langan. And so I don't think I've ever had the luxury of not being able to go. And so I think that that's wise I don't think I was gruff at all, but I think I may have pushed too hard. I think I may have been like, you can do it. We're doing it together. But what I really need to do is just honor those boundaries and say, go as far as you can and stop when you need to. And then we'll circle back.
Yeah. In recent years, well, it's been a few more there anyway, but not that long ago, I taught Heart of Darkness, which I love. I absolutely love. But I had students who were like, nope, I don't like this. Yeah. And I was like, no, but don't you see what he's doing? Blah, blah, blah. And they were like, I still don't like it.
Yeah.
And the same thing, actually not that long ago, I came into possession of an audio book CD version of Lolita read by Jeremy Irons.
Oh.
And it is a brilliant, brilliant audio performance that really just kind of makes that book. But I have had enough people say to me, nope, I'm not doing it. And I respect that, and my feeling with any of these things is you ultimately don't have to read anything you don't want to. The caveat is, but you have to allow other people to.
Yeah.
And as you're like, hey, Cujo isn't for me, but you want to read it, knock yourself out. Great. Then, again, no harm, no foul.
A good lesson. That really helps because I think that I have been hovering the line of like cheerleader and
Yeah, yeah.
also pushing people to the cliff's edge, and I shouldn't. I need to hang back more, I think.
Well, I mean, I feel that it does that there's a larger discussion, I feel, surrounding this about what art is supposed to do.
Yeah.
And I believe that art should make us feel uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And I believe that ultimately we don't do any service, or we do a disservice to ourselves if we avoid those things that make us uncomfortable. But that's easy for me to say.
Yeah.
And so I do try to appreciate that people have, real life experiences that just prohibit them from doing this stuff. And that, in that case, who am I to say, no, you must, you must like this. Maybe I can say, maybe as a teacher, I can say, look, you need to read this. You need to know this, for
Right.
class, but you don't like it. That's fine. You don't have to read it again.
Right. Yeah. I think that's what it is like my instructor authority has
Yeah.
bled into my off hours, and there's not an off button, Mr. Langan.
Right. That's okay. I understand. You're at the checkout counter in the supermarket and you're like, have you read this book?
Right. I'm constantly like, can you ticket? And I'm like, oh no, you don't have to do that. I'm leaving. Pardon me. That's very presumptuous of me. Goodbye.
Right.
But anyway, this has been amazing. I want to give you a little bit of your evening back. Oh man, Mr. Langan, I swear, you are like putting logs on the fire when the fire is low. Just talk to Langan, and then you get a roaring blaze.
Well, thank you.
I so appreciate your insight on this book because it is such a cool king work, and I don't know if it's discussed at length like this, and it should. This is a novel that should really, really be celebrated for all the cool stuff inside.
I really appreciate what you do with this podcast, because I really feel that we live in a world where one of the things that we're pressured to do is to keep up with every new thing. And that's great. I'm publishing new stuff too. I totally understand that. But I also feel that in the midst of that, it's good to be able to look at the things that have come before and to really be able not just to say Cujo liked it, but to really try to open it up and explain and understand what's going on, and possibly more than once, possibly more than with just one person. And so, a podcast like this one, especially where you're really saying, let's just sit down and we're just going to talk for however long, and we're really just going to try to open this thing up and look at what's inside it. That to me is so crucial, because I feel like, I teach in a K through 12 school now, so I don't do as much work in academia, proper as I used to. But my impression was that the kind of like meticulous, almost monkish close reading that I grew up on was really kind of going by the wayside in favor of a lot of sweeping generalizations as you're trying to make large points about cultural trends and so on. Absolutely valid, but I do miss and I do prize the ability to sit down and just say, let's talk about this book or this story. Just let's just go through it, let's comb through it. So I think this is really great.
I so appreciate you. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're very welcome.
It's been so grand. I just feel like such a bonfire inside of like, oh man, it's always very nourishing to speak to you, Mr. Langan. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Likewise.
So before we dipperoonie, we are recording this right before the 4th of July, which is so fun. Can you tell everybody out there what Mr. Langan's hot summer is going to entail? If you have any, if you've got any fun fall
Hot
plans.
summer. I will be at a couple of different writing events over the rest of the summer and into the fall. I'll be at Nikon, which is in a couple of weeks, which is the Northeast Writers Convention. It's a little horror convention held in New Hampshire. Later in the summer, at the end of the summer, I'll be at Necronomicon Providence, which is this massive cosmic horror conference that's held in Providence that I highly recommend. It's great fun. It's one of those conventions where you'll never see everything there is to see because there's so much cool stuff going on. In the fall, actually, I think it's in September, I'm going to South Korea for the first time to do a writers festival. And later, I'm going back to France to do a convention called Utopial. I'll be doing individual writing events, in the midst of this in a couple of weeks. Locally, I'll be talking with Paul Tremblay about his new novel, Dead But Dreaming of Electric Sheep. And yeah, so I, there's no, I will be busy. And as I said, I'm trying to finish a couple of books and a million short stories and give some books blurbs that I've been reading some wonderful books lately. There's a novel called Amityville Awakens by Rob O'Tone that will be out in the fall from Clash Books, and it dives right into the whole Amityville thing in this really cool way. And I highly recommend it. It's a quickish read. And I think, but it very self-consciously harkens back to the kind of 80s style of small town under assault. What happens when the Amityville house gets bulldozed and what was contained in the house gets out? And so there's a lot of cool stuff that I'm reading as well right now as well.
I love that. I'm a sucker for a haunted house. My inner
There
gothic.
you go.
Cannot resist. Mr. Langan, your dance card is full, and I
Yes,
cannot thank you enough for sparing a little bit of time to two-step with us on the show.
Anytime.
All right. Thank you so much. I so appreciate you. Have a great summer and fall.
Thank you. You too. Stay spooky.
Stay spooky. Thank you, John. Can't wait to chat with you again soon. I declare this celebration of all things Cujo and John Langan adjourned. Super huge hugs and big thank yous to my favorite returning guest, horror author John Langan. Whatever the topic is, Mr. Langan is going to add some awesome insight, and I love his perspective. I could talk to John for hours upon hours upon hours, and I think you all feel the same. Please make sure you're all keeping an eye on all of John's upcoming appearances and events. The man, as you heard, is very occupado this year, and before I forget, please wish John a happy 10th anniversary on the publication of his award-winning novel, The Fisherman. If you haven't got a copy already, let's do that. Do it now, today. Make sure you have The Fisherman in your to-be-read pile. I hope John comes back and visits us soon, but until then, I'm gonna keep this train a-rolling. Coming up, I have a few constant reader interviews slotted, and I actually might do a solo Cujo episode here in the future because my notes are ready. And guys, I'm not joking. I really am in love with this book. I can't get over what King accomplished in this one. There's so much good stuff. There's so much to say. I actually might do a solo Cujo episode. It might be a bit of a rehashing of what John and I covered, but I think it still needs to be said. We still got to put it out there. Cujo needs the representation. Coming up in August, I'm going to be rereading The Gunslinger with my Stephen King book club. We are pivoting to The Dark Tower. If you are a member of the Patreon, what happened was I got a little bamboozled by the reading of Black House, which had a lot more Dark Tower content than I was ready for. So we are having to pivot to the Dark Tower. The Gunslinger is coming up, and I am thinking about doing a return episode to the Gunslinger because it's been 5 years since I've read it, and I'd like to see what I catch on this second time around. Oh goodness, dear listeners, I have this awful habit of telling everyone what I'm planning to do, and then something serendipitous and shinier comes along and I end up deviating from the path. So I think it's wise, for now, to gently mention what I'd like to accomplish here in the next few weeks, but ultimately, we'll see what happens. I hope everyone out there is enjoying summer to the best of your ability, and for my fellow Americans, happy 250th birthday to us. We're still a little baby country with much to learn and improve upon, but boy, we've accomplished a lot in this chunk of 250 years, and dare I say, I think I got bit with a little bit of patriotism this July. It's a very welcome sentiment. I blame this wonderful World Cup. It's made me much warmer and fuzzier than my usual grizzled self, and I'm okay with it. If you haven't yet done so, please visit my Patreon, The Dance Macabre with Kim C, at patreon.com/dancewithkimc, which is dance with an S. I have a complimentary episode over there if you'd like to check out my recent read of Joe Hill's King Sorrow, which really, really, really melted my butter. Whoa, what a great novel. Still not over it. It is something to celebrate. That one is complimentary to all ye who head in that direction if you'd like to check out what I've got going on over there. If it's a little quiet here on the Year of Underrated Stephen King, be sure to check on the Patreon, as I've usually got some shorter and sweeter King content bubbling over there. Until then, take care. I will be in touch with you all very soon. Thank you for listening. Stay cool.